In the course of time, some of these Indians had entered the South African Republic. At first, no difficulties had been raised, but as time passed, trade jealousy, aided by color prejudice, resulted in anti Asiatic legislation and administrative practice by the Boer government, involving race segregation and the denial to Indians of civil rights enjoyed by the white immigrants. The British government constantly protested to the Boer authorities against their anti Indian policy. It is conceivable that Gandhi may have all unconsciously received his first suggestions regarding the method of civil disobedience when, the Boer government having refused to issue any more trading licenses to Indians, the British agent at Pretoria recommended them to tender the license fees, and if the licenses were still refused, to trade without them. Later, when the government threatened to prosecute for trading without licenses, the British agent warmly approved of the advice given to the traders to pay no bail or fines but to go to jail. During this time, repeated representations, many of them drafted by Gandhi himself, were made by the Indian community against this oppression, and it is on record that the Indian grievances against the Republican government were included in the British casus belli. Lord Lansdowne declaring at Sheffield in 1899, among the many misdeeds of the South African Republic, I do not know that any fills me with more indignation than his treatment of these Indians. In Natal, where Gandhi had founded and was actively working as the honorary secretary of the Natal Indian Congress, the situation was not much better under responsible government. He was largely instrumental in inducing the Colonial Office under Mr. Joseph Chamberlain to refuse acceptance of the Asiatics Exclusion Act, passed by the Natal legislature on account of its breach of the imperial policy against racial legislation. But he and his countrymen could not prevent the virtual disfranchisement of the Indian population, excepting the few already on the voters' roll, on the ground that they did not enjoy the franchise in India. Soon a strong anti Indian movement was in full swing in the colony, and he was accordingly deputed to go to India in 1896 to represent the Indian grievances to the government and people, partly because of misrepresentations in the natal press of his activities, and partly because of the circulation of a report that the ships bringing him and a number of Indian indentured laborers to South Africa in the following year were carrying large numbers of skilled workers from India to take the place of white workers. An unruly demonstration was made against him on arrival at Durban. He was physically assaulted, and he escaped with this difficulty in a policeman's uniform. When the Boer War began in 1899, Gandhi, loyal British subject and proud of the British connection, reminded his countrymen that if they demanded rights, they must also bear responsibilities. The Indian community accordingly offered their services in any capacity, however menial. And at last, against great opposition, induced the military authorities to accept an Indian ambulance corps, whose principal leader was Gandhi. Though the authorities did not require the corps to enter the firing line, it repeatedly did so in the great emergency that arose, and Gandhi records that it carried from the field of Cheveley the body of Lord Roberts' son. The Indian contribution to the campaign was praised by General Buller and widely appreciated, even by former political opponents. Gandhi and the other Indian leaders received medals for their services when the corps was disbanded. In 1901, Gandhi, refusing costly gifts from his compatriots, returned to India for reasons of health, with the intention of settling in Bombay. But fate willed otherwise. When a few months later, Mr. Chamberlain went out to South Africa to lay down the lines of permanent settlement of the British Boer controversy. The natal Indian community called urgently to Gandhi to return in order to help them to make the necessary representations on their behalf for citizenship rights. He responded from a strong sense of duty and led the Indian deputation to Mr. Chamberlain. Shortly afterwards, when the colonial secretary went to the Transvaal, Gandhi was summoned there by the Indian settlers, whose representation he drafted, and at their request he settled in practice in Johannesburg, where he felt that he could be of the maximum service to his compatriots. To their dismay, they found that not only was the Boer anti-Indian legislation and administration against which the British government before the war had so energetically protested maintained, it was tightened up and added to under the Crown colony regime. In order to protect the community against inroads upon their few remaining rights, Gandhi helped to set up the Transvaal British Indian Association, of which he became the honorary secretary and the draftsman of its many powerful memorials. The association had repeatedly drawn attention to the neglect by the Johannesburg municipality of sanitary conditions in the Indian location, where the majority of the Indians resided. When therefore in 1904 plague broke out there, Gandhi refused to allow the major responsibility for the outbreak to be thrust upon his countrymen and demanded that it should be placed where it properly belonged. Closing his office, he devoted himself to sanitary work and evacuation and to the nursing of the victims, for which he received the acknowledgement of the medical officer of health. But the mischief was done. In addition to the generally prevalent anti Asiatic prejudice, trade jealousy was aroused once more by the distribution of a large part of the Indian trading population from the burnt out Johannesburg location to other towns in the Transvaal, creating the impression of an Asiatic invasion. Pressure was now brought to bear by the white trading community upon the authorities to protect the colony from this invasion. And in due course, the anti Indian campaign bore fruit. Two events of importance at this stage of Gandhi's career occurred. The first was his taking over of the full financial responsibility for the international printing press and the weekly newspaper Indian Opinion, to which he had already generously contributed by both purse and pen. The paper became an invaluable propaganda organ for the South African Indian population and for Gandhi's own views on matters affecting it. Towards the end of 1904, he had transferred both the press and the paper to the Phoenix settlement near Durban, which he had established as the result of his conversion to the Ruskin ideal of the simple life. After reading on to this last, he had already made deep studies of the Sermon on the Mount and the Bhagavad Gita, and had been much influenced by Tolstoy's writings. Here he set up a little colony of Indian and European friends and colleagues who lived and worked happily together in public service. During the later passive resistance struggle, the paper helped greatly under Gandhi's guidance and inspiration to preserve unity among his countrymen, to encourage the Hindu Mohammedan collaboration for which he has always stood, and to explain to the outside world the motives underlying the struggle and its objective. In 1906, there occurred the native rebellion in Natal. In this new emergency, the Indian community, under Gandhi's leadership, offered a stretcher bearer company to the government, who accepted it, with Gandhi as its sergeant major. The company rendered valuable service, and upon its disbandment at the end of the rebellion, the community received the warm thanks of the government. In 1902, the Transvaal government, upon an assurance to the Indian community that this would be the final identification requirement, had induced the leaders to agree to the exchange of the old buyer residential license receipts for immigration permits to male Indians bearing the owner's right thumb impression. Scarcely, however, had Gandhi returned to Johannesburg after the rebellion, than a draft ordinance was published, cancelling in breach of Lord Milner's earlier undertaking the permits issued to the Asiatic settlers. It required men and women alike to satisfy the authorities afresh of their bona fides by making application for certificates of registration bearing a full set of finger impressions, previously demanded only of convicted prisoners. A mass meeting of protest was held in Johannesburg, which he addressed, and which, at Gandhi's instance, took an oath to adopt passive resistance and to go to jail rather than accept a law that was regarded as an insult to the Indian community and to the motherland. As a result of energetic representations, the Indian leaders secured the exclusion of women from the proposed legislation, but they failed to persuade the government to drop the measure, which was ultimately passed by the Legislative Council. As the ordinance was of a differential character, it was reserved for the royal assent. With a view to prevent this, Gandhi and a colleague were sent to England as a deputation. In consequence of their activities in London, the South Africa British Indian Committee was set up there, with Lord Ampthill as its president. And in the end, the royal assent was refused. This result Willis welcomed as a great victory for right and justice by the South African Indian community and by the public in India, was deeply resented by the white population of the Transvaal. Within a few months, responsible government was accorded to the colony, and the first important measure passed by the new legislature was the almost textual reenactment of the disallowed ordinance. The royal assent was, notwithstanding the strong protest of the Indian community and of the government of India, given in view of the new constitutional status of the colony, and the historic passive resistance campaign was immediately launched by the Indian community under Gandhi's guidance. Gandhi and a number of other leaders were arrested, convicted, and imprisoned, but the campaign continued to gather force until the Botha government decided to negotiate with Gandhi through General Smuts, the Minister of the Interior. An agreement was reached upon the basis of voluntary registration. According to Gandhi's statement to his compatriots, immediately upon his release and uncontradicted at the time by the authorities, when the voluntary registration was successfully completed, the Black Act was to be repealed, and the voluntary registration certificates were to be validated. A few of his countrymen fail to appreciate the subtle distinction between the voluntary and the compulsory giving of finger impressions, and charged him with betrayal of the cause, threatening his life if he attempted to register. Undeterred, he was proceeding to the registration office to be the first to do so when he was set upon by a Pathan and nearly killed. Upon regaining consciousness, however, and before receiving medical attention, he made his application, thus rallying his compatriots. The dismay of Gandhi and his people, therefore, was great when, at the end of the period fixed for voluntary re registration, which was duly completed, the government introduced and passed new legislation, validating the voluntary certificates and giving them equal effect to the few that had been issued under the Black Act, but omitting all provision for repeal of that act. At a public meeting held in Johannesburg, the new act was denounced. The voluntary certificates were consigned to the flames, and passive resistance was renewed in July 1908. Many hundreds of Indians, including Gandhi's repeatedly, as well as his wife and other members of his family, suffered imprisonment, and many Indian homes and businesses were broken up. The struggle did not actually cease until June 1914, when, after many fluctuations of fortune, the Black Act was finally repealed, as was the Pound 3 annual tax upon ex dentured Indians in Natal. Indian marriages upon whose validity the courts had cast doubt were legalized for immigration purposes, and the status of the Indian community was for the time being at least stabilized. Three episodes in particular stand out in the campaign. The first was Gandhi's second mission to England in 1909, upon his return from which he published his Confession of Faith in a pamphlet entitled Hind Swaraj, or Indian Home Rule, a parallel mission carried on propaganda in India. Under the guidance of Mr. G. K. Gokhale, gaining support from government and public alike, and resulting in the stoppage of indentured labour for Natal in 1910, and in a strong protest in 1913 by the Viceroy, Lord Hardinge, against the Indian treatment in South Africa. The second was the Great March into the Transvaal, led by Gandhi in 1913, of natal Indian indentured labourers to court imprisonment as a protest against the failure of the Union government to carry out its undertaking to Mr. Gokhale during his visit to South Africa in 1912 to repeal the C3 tax. The third was Gandhi's refusal, when he was on the point of resuming the struggle because of General Smuts' unwillingness to introduce the necessary remedial legislation to take advantage of the government's embarrassment during the general strike of European workers in the Transvaal early in 1914. Finally, won over by the passive resistors, by Gandhi's able advocacy of Indian rights, and by the representations of a high official deputed by the Government of India to assist in a settlement, the long drawn out struggle was brought to an end, and Gandhi, amid the applause and with the goodwill of all sections of the population, European and Indian, felt at last free to return to the motherland to begin the public work for which his soul had long thirsted. Part 2. The Mahatma. He went first to England, arriving there on the eve of the outbreak of the Great War. Immediately, he set himself to the task of organizing among the resident Indian community an ambulance corps for service at the front, but ill health prevented his accompanying it, and upon his recovery, he was obliged to proceed to India, where he arrived in 1915, just before the death of Gokhale. Soon after his arrival, and in pursuance of a promise made to Gokhale, Gandhi began a year's tour of his motherland. After an absence of 14 years, his overseas work against powerful odds and his great personal sacrifices had already established him firmly in the hearts and imagination of his countrymen. Many of whom endowed him with the qualities of a superman and the title of Mahatma, great soul, was conferred upon him by the people. Gandhi's first work after the tour was to establish near Ahmedabad an ashram or retreat where a little group of men and women settled who had accepted his general principles. Here were tried out the methods of the simple collective life that had been begun in South Africa, without restrictions of class, creed, or class. Soon a problem arose that tested the fundamental tenets of the settlement. Some untouchables sought admission to it. Gandhi consulted his followers, and it was agreed that the untouchables should not be refused. As a result, the financial support of the orthodox, upon which the ashram had greatly depended, was withdrawn, and he found himself without resources. When he realized this, he declared, "We will then have to leave here and live in the untouchable quarter with them." However, the situation was saved by a timely anonymous gift that enabled him to continue his work. Meanwhile, the agitation against indentured labor immigration to British colonies overseas had been steadily growing, and its suspension was demanded. Gandhi, who had in South Africa fought the system, which had been denounced by Sir W. W. Hunter as semi slavery, now led the attack upon it once more, as degrading to India. All shades of opinion were united in support of this campaign. Success was reached in 1970, and shortly after the war, Indentured labor immigration was finally prohibited. People had by now begun to turn instinctively to Gandhi for help, and leadership in obtaining redress of grievances. Complaints of the conditions of the indigo cultivators in Champaran, Bihar, were brought to him. He went into the question, collected the facts, and sought an interview with the planters to discuss the matter. But he received scant sympathy or courtesy from them, and regarding him as a stranger, they requested his non intervention. Nor were the authorities any more helpful. He proclaimed an open campaign against the methods of indigo cultivation, and disobeying an order to leave the district was arrested. But his detention was of short duration. In court, he gave a closely reasoned statement as to his position in Champaran and telegraphed an appeal to the viceroy to intervene, with the result that the proceedings were withdrawn and he was enabled to set up a private inquiry into the Champaran riots' grievances. Ultimately, a committee of inquiry was set up by the Lieutenant Governor of Bihar, to which he was appointed. It found substantially in favor of the riots and made important recommendations, to which effect was duly given. So began the work that he had long hoped to undertake of agrarian reform and the improvement of village conditions. A labor dispute in the Ahmedabad mills led to his first public fast. Gandhi had extracted from the strikers a promise to stand firm and to do so without violence of word or deed. Too much probably was expected of them. They began to falter, and the strike looked like collapsing. To rally them again, he took a tremendous resolution, vowing not to touch food until the strike was settled. He said afterwards that he realized that he had, by his action, placed an unfair burden upon the mill owners, many of whom were his friends. For so great a following had Gandhi that they were compelled to come to terms rather than let ill befall him. Thus the strikers won. If not all, they asked for a considerable part of it, and a new weapon in dealing with public affairs was forged, that of suffering in one's own person for the sins or errors of others. It implied no new doctrine, but as a method of securing redress of a collective wrong it had not been used before. It struck the public imagination. Satyagraha, soul force, was now to be pitted against physical force. Would it prove a mightier power? Much was said and written about it, and the method and circumstances of its exercise. And the influence which Gandhi had already gained over the minds and hearts of men grew rapidly. No sooner was the mill strike over than a new struggle began, which put into the operation Satyagraha. In Kaira district, the crops failed. Famine conditions threatened, and many cultivators were unable to pay the tax demands. Gandhi was called to their aid. He drafted a petition and therein exercised the statutory right to ask for suspension of revenue collections. But the petition failed. Then Gandhi advised the sufferers and their sympathizers to refrain from attempting to pay. They should not sell their all and thus permanently impoverish or ruin themselves. Refuse to pay. He said, even those of you who can, and take the consequences at the hands of the law. News of the struggle spread over India. Money was sent to help the flight. Time passed, and the peasants began to lose nerve under the threats of the officials, and at the sight of their cattle and goods seized and sold. Standing crops in some cases were attached, and Gandhi grew anxious as he saw the wavering of the people. Again, something urgent had to be done. He therefore suggested to some of his followers that they should remove the crops themselves from a field that had been attached. He knew that this might mean their being arrested, but all were willing to test it out. They were arrested and given short terms of imprisonment. Fortunately, the struggle ended soon by an agreed compromise. But the Kaira struggle was a great step in the awakening of the masses of India to a sense of their rights and their own ability to secure redress. They were not to sleep again.